Howdy, everybody. This is Beverly from Hamtopia coming at you with the next chapter of The Reaper and the Scribe. Today is April 15th. I can't keep track of these days, they really are all melting together. So let's get on with chapter 25. And thank you for coming. In the 21st century, Alice Winters Chambers was sitting at her desk when the person she was expecting tapped on the office door. "Come in," said Alice, as she looked at her watch to see the lady in question was right on time. The door opened, and in walked Laura Dinsdale. Alice came from behind her desk and greeted Laura with a knowing smile. "It must be 10 years since I've seen you, Laura. How are you?" "I'm very well, thank you, and very glad to be back here. I hope your father is well and enjoying his retirement," answered Laura. "I rather think he is. Now please, do take a seat, Laura." The two women sat down and began to discuss the work that they would be doing together. Alice assured Laura that she would have everything that she needed to do the job she was charged with, and any help she wanted, she need only ask. Every part of the work charged to Laura was gone over in fine detail. All the contacts that Alice had made during her trip were handed over, and a company bank account had been set up in Laura's name to finance the building requirements. She was told that she didn't need approval for the decisions that she was making, but the accounts would be audited monthly with such large figures going in and out. Laura was pleased to accept the challenge, and she saw a bright future for herself in the only company that she had worked for since leaving college. The two women parted with a friendly hug, and as Laura left the office, it felt like she had just left one of her friends rather than leaving the office of one of the most powerful business people in Great Britain. Laura stopped at the Winters family portrait and again stared at the man she hoped would soon be in her life. She smiled at the way things were beginning to turn out for her and made her way out of reception. The short journey home was pleasant enough, but what was waiting for her when she got there made her day. It was a small van parked outside her house with flower decals along the side panels. Standing at her door was a young man holding the biggest bunch of flowers she had ever seen. Her heart raced as she quickened her step up the garden path to meet him. "Hello, are those for me?" "Are you Laura Dinsdale?" "I certainly am." "Then yes, these are for you," said the young man as he passed Laura the bunch of flowers. "Thank you very much," said Laura, wearing the largest smile the young man had ever seen. The man smiled and made his way back to his van and drove off. Laura fiddled with her keys, trying to open the front door. Eventually, she gained entrance and made her way to the kitchen, where she hurriedly placed the flowers on the table and ripped open the envelope. The note said, "My day was enriched by meeting you yesterday. Please accept these flowers in the hope that we will soon meet again." The note was signed Jamie Winters, and his telephone number had been written underneath. Laura sat down for a moment at the kitchen table, her emotions all over the place. She took her phone from her handbag and quickly tapped in the numbers written on the card. The phone rang a couple of times, and then Jamie answered with simple words. "Hello, Jamie Winters." Jamie waited for a reply as Laura searched for the words to say, eventually saying, "Hi, Jamie, it's Laura. I have just received your wonderful flowers, and they're beautiful. Thank you so much." Jamie was taken aback by how quickly the flowers had been delivered and wasn't quite prepared for Laura's phone call. He soon gathered his thoughts and said, "It's my pleasure. Meeting you yesterday totally brightened my day. I hope you didn't mind the forwardness of me sending you the flowers." "I most certainly didn't. I cannot remember when I last had flowers delivered. You have made my day too, and now I need to know how I can repay you for your wonderful act." This might be a bit forward of me, but maybe you would have dinner with me some..." Before Jamie could finish the words, Laura interrupted him with, "Yes, anytime. You tell me when, and I will be there." Laura took a sharp intake of breath and couldn't believe how gushing she was. Jamie was taken aback and couldn't believe how lucky he was and said, "How about tonight? I could come and pick you up at 8. We could go for a meal and then maybe see a show, go have a drink, do anything you want, really." Laura giggled and said, "I may be wrong, but you seem as excited by this as I am. I don't even know you, but I feel I've known you all my life. I know that sounds stupid, but I cannot help it. It's how I feel." "I understand that feeling. It is how I felt when I first saw you. I knew I needed to see you again, and as I thought I had already bored you to death with my talk of steam locomotives, I hoped the flowers might give me another chance with you," said Jamie. "Another chance? I was hooked on your every word, and while you were talking about steam trains, I was just thinking of ways that I could meet up with you," answered Laura. "Wow, I'm at a loss as to what to say. I've never been good at this sort of thing. I've never really had the company of a lady. Well, not in a very long time," said Jamie, a wry smile coming to his face. "It's a date, then. 8 o'clock tonight. I will be ready and awaiting your arrival." "I promise you I won't be late." "I'll be waiting," said Laura as she ended the call. Jamie calmly placed his phone on the table and then leapt into the air, screaming, "Yes! Yes! Yes!" Within a minute of putting her phone down, Laura had already arranged the babysitter for that evening. Her plans for the evening were going to be asking her friend Diane over for a drink, but those plans had now changed. Everything in the 21st century was now moving along in the right direction. The work that Alice Winters Chambers had undertaken and the people she had put in place to take care of this work were following a set plan. The plan was not of Alice's instigation, rather a plan that began with her ancestors and was now flowing through her. A plan that began in 1849 on a canal bank with the exchange of a ring. Things had been put in place to keep Alice and her brother Jamie happy. For Alice, it was the realization that Freddie Chambers was her forever love, and that she could now use the resources of one of the largest companies in Great Britain to help the country's young people. For Jamie, his rewards were his restored railway gathered together in a way that no other restorer could have possibly done, and, like his sister, a chance meeting that took place in a previous century would blossom into love in his own century. So, two of the main players that Mother Nature would need in the future were being kept happy in the present. Back in Victorian times, similar things were afoot as the merriment and all the revelations of the handover day of Albert Winter's boat subsided, and the next day dawned with the meeting of a certain Mr. Atkinson in the old Tudor building owned by Atkinson, and Dewhurst. John Winters, dressed in his best suit and new top hat, his shoes shined to a mirror finish as he looked at his reflection in the mirror, was ready for his day of destiny. For a few seconds, his mind wandered back to the scruffy young lad looking for a job years earlier. His mind returned to the now, to the reflection of a fine young gentleman staring back at him. He was a little apprehensive about his upcoming meeting with the accountants, but had a fair idea that things would be sorted out for him. So far, everything that had occurred had seemed to do so to a set plan, a plan not of his own fruition, but a plan he was willing to go ahead with, as he knew it came from a much higher power. Everything that the voice in his head had predicted so far had come to fruition, so the meeting was clearly part of that. He checked once more the reflection in the mirror, and then one more look at his pocket watch, and it was time to leave. He called into the factory first to leave instructions about the delivery of steel that was due, and to let the foreman know he would be back after lunch. John Winters strode out from the factory and walked the short distance into the center of Leeds for his appointment at the old Tudor building. On entering its magnificent reception, an elderly gentleman approached him. "Good morning, Mr. Winters. I will inform Mr. Atkinson of your arrival." John was slightly confused as to how this old man knew his name. He dismissed his confusion by thinking he was probably the only appointment for that time of day. It didn't take long before a tall man in a long black coat, black trousers, black shirt and cravat walked up to him and shook his hand. The man's hand was cold, but his handshake was firm. "Good morning, Mr. Winters. My name is Atkinson. I am the junior partner here, and I have been charged with assisting you through the sale of your design." John felt rather intimidated by this very confident person, and doubted his ability to talk business with him. Atkinson had told him to wait for his personal secretary to see him into the office, while he gathered together the necessary papers of the transaction that was going to transpire. In the brief time that John stood in reception, he looked at one of the desks and saw a young man sitting there. He looked scared. His demeanor was not that of a confident office worker. It was more that of a frightened young man who didn't really know what was happening around him. John Winters walked up to his desk and said, "Hello, I'm John Winters, and I'm new to this sort of thing. How are you today?" The nervous man barely dare look up from his ledger, but did manage to say, "Hello, my name is John Smith, and I'm fine, thank you. I must get back to my work now." The office clerk's body language told John Winters that he didn't really want a conversation, so he backed away. As he did, a beautiful young lady walked towards him and said, "Good morning, Mr. Winters. My name is Tamara Stapleton. I am the personal assistant to Mr. Atkinson. Would you kindly step this way into his office while he prepares the papers he will need for your discussion?" John found it hard to answer. It wasn't that the question was too hard. It was that he had never seen a woman as beautiful as this vision standing in front of him. He simply nodded his head and followed Tamara into the office. After a few seconds, he realized what had caused his confusion, as the light bursting through the office window caught her tightly fitting dress. The light shone clean through it, and she was wearing no foundation undergarments. Other than members of his family, he had never seen the woman's shape before, and unlike his sister, who he had shared many a naked swim in the canal with, this woman's shape affected him in a way he had never experienced. "I see you are admiring my dress, Mr. Winters. I have just had it made, and the seamstress who made it told me she's actually made a gown for Queen Victoria herself." "I've never seen anything like it. It is beautiful," confessed John. "Why, thank you very much. You're too kind. Now, if you would care to sit here, Mr. Atkinson will be along presently. May I offer you a beverage? Tea, perhaps, or maybe something a little stronger?"
"Oh, tea, please. It's far too early for anything stronger for me."
"Tea it is, then," said Tamara, as she disappeared through the door, leaving the most exotic fragrance in her wake. John Winters was still taking that fragrance in when Atkinson entered the room.
"Mr. Winters, I do hope Tamara has looked after you while I sorted things out,"
said Atkinson, as he placed the folders onto the desk.
"Indeed she has, sir. In that case, we have a lot to cover, so shall we get down to business?"
"I am at your disposal," said John.
"I think you will find that I am at your disposal, Mr. Winters," said Atkinson, Jr.
Atkinson, Jr. began by explaining what he and his firm did and how long they had been doing their work. He assured John Winters that he was in the best hands that he could possibly be. Many assurances were given about how safe his money would be in their hands. The current head of Atkinson and Dewhurst failed to mention the commodities that they normally dealt with. That information would have been far too frightening for the timid but brilliant man sitting in front of him.
"Mr. Winters, let us begin by discussing the sums of money that have been offered to totally purchase all rights to copyright and ownership of all the tooling, workforce, and factory."
"The tooling, workforce, and factory don't belong to me. They belong to my employer.
If I may, Mr. Winters, this deal would have been far too complicated if what you were selling was your intellectual copyright. Maybe if we lived in the 20th century and not the 19th, that would be a viable commodity. However, who knows what the future holds? Because of the complexity, this company has worked out a deal with your employer to sell up to you lock, stock, and barrel before you sell. That way he can retire on a very healthy sum of money, and you'll have more persuasion, shall we say, when it comes to dictating the closing price. Time is of the essence with this deal, as this is but a brief opening in the fabric of history. I don't expect you to understand that, nor do you need to, but what has transpired up until now has needed to happen. Are you following me so far, Mr. Winters?"
"I think I am, but you must understand, Mr. Atkinson, this is all very new to me, and it's all moving a little fast."
"Indeed it is, Mr. Winters. That is why I am here, so that you don't need to worry about the business side of this. You have come up with something revolutionary, and under normal circumstances, for the times we live in, someone would just come and steal it and copyright it under their own name. With you, this cannot be allowed to happen. This is the reason you are with this particular company. What you do now will influence the future, and that future must be influenced. I am not privy as to why that is. I simply know that it is something I must deal with for some reason. So, Mr. Winters, to the nitty-gritty of this deal and the important figures at its bottom line. John Winters was sitting in a very old leather armchair, his surroundings unfamiliar to his way of life. He thought back 5 years to starting at the factory when a sudden rush of memories filled his head. A strange memory of a different time, of different faces, of museums and horseless carriages. He and his sister in the future with Freddie Chambers. He began to perspire as Atkinson Jr. said, "Do you feel unwell, Mr. Winters? A drink of water, perhaps?" As John Winters sat there about to answer his accountant, 2 miles away in the railway station on Marsh Lane, his sister Alice had been privy to the same mental picture. She stood holding on to a lamp post, not sure what was going on, but that familiar voice in her head said, "Be still, Alice. All is well." Back in the office, John wiped his brow with his handkerchief and said, "I'm fine, sir. Please do carry on. The figures that you and your family need to live your lives with are not really important, as provision has been made for each member of the Winters family to have an allowance which far exceeds the amount of money they will need to live the rest of their lives out in a manner that none of you are accustomed to. Other monies will be placed into long-term trusts. The beneficiaries of these trusts have come to me from the highest source possible, so high, in fact, that even I am not privy to the name. Only the company name, which is Nature Industries, is known to me. The other company name is Winters Logistics. The Winters Logistics money will be available in the next century. The Nature Industries money will be made available in the 21st century," said Atkinson Jr. "This is all hard for me to take in, Mr. Atkinson. What kind of figures are we talking about here?" "The figures have been greatly boosted by investors of a different kind. This money is not just put up by the gentleman you met on the canal bank, Mr. Winters. There has been a vast investment by powerful people that you will never meet. As I have already said, Mr. Winters, even I am not privy to some of that information." "You are right, Mr. Atkinson. I don't understand. There's a lot of what has gone on over the past 5 years that I haven't understood, but something inside me has always said that what I'm doing is right. So, in keeping with that, I will agree to the stipulations and sign your paper as long as this doesn't mean that I must give up engineering. All you are giving up is the rights to and the knowledge of what you invented. Your name will not be remembered regarding your invention. With your vast fortune, you can now buy your own factory and do whatever engineering you please. We as a company will tend your financial situation all through your personal and professional life. With that, I shall now show you the figures." Still looking rather daunted by all of what was transpiring, John just nodded his head. "The sums involved, Mr. Winters, are £30 million for each of the 2 trust funds I have spoken of, £20,000 for the factory and machinery, £10,000 for your parents' house and retirement, £35,000 for yourself and the same for your two siblings, £35,000 for your sister to set up her new business venture, and finally, a one-off payment to you of £20,000 to start your new engineering practice, should you desire it. Otherwise, use that as a bonus should you decide to retire early. All in all, Mr. Winters, that will be a grand total of £60,190,000. Does this sound satisfactory to your good self?" John Winters still sat there, dazed and confused, but managed to say, I don't really understand these numbers. What does million mean?" "That is the very reason we are taking care of this for you. All you need to do is accept this generous offer and then forget all about canal boats. In fact, the forgetting will be taken care of as soon as you sign your name at the bottom of this contract." Atkinson slid the document across the desk, turning it around with his long, slender fingers. John picked up the quill as Tamara placed a china cup of tea at the side of the document. She gave him a reassuring smile and nod of her head. John smiled back as his hand swished the quill across the parchment, as if something else was guiding his hand. As soon as John Winters finished his signature, the ink seemed to glow for a second or two. Then Atkinson Jr. placed a piece of blotting paper over it to soak up the excess ink. Tamara let 6 drops of sealing wax drip just below John's signature, and Atkinson depressed his ornate ring into the molten wax, depositing his seal on the deal. The very second that Atkinson sealed the deal, John Winters fainted. Although only unconscious for a few seconds, it was all the time that Atkinson and Tamara needed, for when John Winters came around from his faint, the deal he had signed looked far more normal, as the 60 million part had disappeared and the money safely deposited into both trust funds for future events. Although he wasn't aware of it, something else was missing from John's memory. The whole of the previous 6 years, including the time before the dominant memory of a switch in time had left his and his sister's conscious thoughts. It had been replaced with a different memory, a memory of a successful business that he, his father, and his sister had built up and now sold. The sale of the coal barge business was to pave the way for the new venture that his sister would run. The business would still be moving commodities, but no longer would it be by means of the canal. The Winters family would now move not only coal, but many other commodities, including but not limited to fine silks, foodstuffs, and milk, by rail. In the station, just a couple of miles away, Alice Winters needed to sit down, as she received the same sensation that her brother had just experienced. When her normal feelings returned, she carried on with what she was doing, but she could sense something had changed, the passing of something, a disturbance in her psyche. It was as if she had just lost something very valuable. She thought of her son Frederick and tried to remember why she had named him after her childhood friend. But for the life of her, she could not remember why, nor did she feel the need to anymore. John Winters left the offices of Atkinson, and Dewhurst, and walked back to the temporary boat that his parents now lived in. When he arrived, he found his parents below deck, enjoying a mug of tea. Well, how did it go, lad?
It went perfectly to plan, and I have here the deeds to your new home. John passed his father the document that Tamara had slipped into his inside pocket whilst he had passed out. It wasn't a house by the sea, because Albert didn't want to leave the canal. It was a lock-keeper's cottage, just on the outskirts of the city center. This was something Albert was very happy about. The dry dock was empty, and lightning only existed now as a 12 by 8-inch artist impression of the original that John had commissioned. This picture was now, of course, Albert's prized possession. It was quite a surreal moment when Alice returned and began to talk about the upcoming move their parents were making at the weekend. They were all now totally oblivious of time travel, apprenticeships, and everything that had transpired during the previous 6 years. All the family knew was that they were all very rich, and by the weekend would all own their own houses, all that is, except James, who would be moving in with John. Alice explained to her brother and father that she had found a base to run the new family business from, and she would be signing for the premises first thing Monday morning. John asked his sister who she was dealing with. She told him the firm was called Atkinson, and Dewhurst. The name didn't mean anything to him, as he said, "I've never heard of 'em. Are they estate agents?" "They're accountants, but rather luckily they owned a station building that they didn't need anymore and are letting me have it for a decent price," explained Alice. "I hope they are reputable," said John. "I'm sure they are," said Alice. In the offices of Atkinson, and Dewhurst, Atkinson Jr. and Tamara were sitting, looking at the new folio. "So, enlighten me," said Tamara. "What has just transpired?" she continued. "This is Dewhurst's work. He asked me to organize this, but to keep it from my father. I think something is amiss between those two, and I am wondering if I can somehow exploit that situation." "What do you mean?" "Dewhurst seems to be setting something up for the future. I don't know what it is yet, or who the sleeping partners are with so much money that they can give towards a doomed mode of transportation," said Atkinson Jr. "What if this power is a higher source of power than Dewhurst?" "Only my father is a higher source of power. No, there is one that wields as much power as your father, my darling. I can't see her helping the reapers, though." "Who do you speak of, Tamara?" "Your mother." "My mother is dead." "Your mother cannot be dead, not while the flowers still bloom and the wind still blows." "You're talking in riddles, Tamara. Besides, our work here is now done, and a higher power, whoever or whatever it is, concerns me not at this moment in time. The thing that does concern me is this possible rift between my father and Dewhurst. This really could be what I have been waiting for." "Then we shall see what the future holds for us, because whatever your future is, my future is as well." "You have always been, and will always be, my eternal list maker, my lover, my friend," said Atkinson Jr., as he took hold of Tamara and drew her close to him. The elegant couple kissed passionately, and then returned to their respective desks in the old Tudor building, with the sign Atkinson, and Dewhurst over the door. The following Saturday in Victorian England was a beautiful, sunny day,
as Albert drank an early morning mug of tea. He thought he might be more upset to be moving off the boat, but as he had never settled onto what he described as a makeshift home, he had no feelings towards leaving it. So enlightening had been the past few years to him that he knew it was a necessary thing to do. Albert had decided that the move to the lock-keeper's cottage was going to be a happy move and a new life for him and Doris in semi-retirement. This time, none of the furniture would be going with them, as the new cottage was totally furnished from top to bottom, even down to the pots and pans and the cutlery. Alice and Doris joined Albert on the deck, along with young Frederick. "Well, Dad, how do you feel?" "To tell you the truth, I am looking forward to being a lock-keeper. I can tell you that much for nothing." "I'm looking forward to having a kitchen," said Doris. "It is going to be strange leaving Frederick with you, though," said Alice. "He will be just fine, lass. You can visit him whenever you like, or should I say, whenever you have time. Time is a very important thing, Alice, and we must not waste it," said Albert. Alice looked thoughtful. The statement that her father had just made seemed to resonate around in her head. She looked at Frederick, who was in her arms, and then looked back to her father and said, "You're right, Dad. You've always been right. Tomorrow belongs to me and my generation, and we are going to change things, Dad. I promise you that. I will take your business into the next century on rails. You are the start of something that is going to be great. I know this to be true." "I have every faith in you, Alice. You have proved to be as good and as strong as any I have worked with. No one can take away your achievements. You will go from strength to strength, and I am so very proud of you." At that point, the horse-drawn taxi arrived for Albert and Doris to take them from the jetty just down from the dry dock in Leeds to the canal side just outside the city center, then to their lock-keeper's cottage and semi-retirement. Alice kissed Frederick on the forehead as she held back tears. She smiled and said, "You be a good boy for Grandpa and Grandma. I'll be along soon, see how you are settling in your new room. For now, I have things to do, my darling boy. But believe me, I shall be back soon." Little Frederick placed his arms around his mother's neck and kissed her cheek. The parting was made easier by higher powers that the Winters family knew nothing of, as the little boy just smiled sweetly at his mother and then put his arms out for his grandmother, who took hold of him. Alice was struggling to hold back the tears, so she just said goodbye as she watched her parents and her son climb aboard the hackney carriage. She waved them off, knowing that her two brothers were awaiting the arrival of their parents at the new dwelling. The hackney carriage slowly moved away to the clip-clop sound of the horses' hooves. At that point in time, the strength she had shown her parents and son when standing in front of them left her body, and the tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. Alice bid goodbye to her past life of Alice Chambers Winters to become Alicia Winters, the great-great-great-grandmother of the notoriously spoiled woman of the same name in the following century that would rise to such great heights in the preservation of humankind.